In today's lecture, we're going to go over how to detail this drawing that we had already done a video on how to build. So consider this video 2 of our bracket drawing. Here, Joe has kindly let us use his drawing, so Joe gets credit. Good job, Joe. Here, we dropped in one dimension. It comes out very large. We know that the rules of our drawings, the drafting standards, require us to have the following standards. So I'm going to open this real quick so everybody sees it clearly. Those of you watching the video, this is inside your Blackboard shell for this class. If you're watching this video on the World Wide Web, just take a photograph of this image. I'll leave it on the screen for a few minutes. Remember all the rules of drafting. For inch drawings, our first dimension is 1/2 inch away from the part, shown right here. Our second dimension is 3/8 of an inch away from the part. The gap from the object to that first dimension is 1/8 of an inch. Our object lines are thicker than our center lines or our hidden lines. Okay. Our text height is 1/8 of an inch. Our arrow information is here, length 1/8 of an inch, width 0.0625, so they're very narrow. We don't want wide arrows. When it comes to leader lines, they might be 45 degrees, 30 degrees. To be honest, it's okay. It can be any degrees. They just can't be in each other's way, and you don't want them interfering with other details on the drawing. Okay? So now I'm going to minimize this. The drawing that we're working on is this one. It has the auxiliary view over here. We talked about building this break line. This was done using the break line function. Now we're ready to detail it. There is a reference here because you threw this in because we didn't have a dimension here, but it's pointing to the side wall, so I'm going to take take the arrow off. Okay. This was a leader that was trying to attempt to show this gap, because in our drawing we had agreed that the distance from this bottom hole to this bend is 3/8 of an inch. That's this 0.375. I am going to take this off and we're going to include it in the dimension itself. Before we can begin though, when we dropped our first dimension, what do we notice? That's very large compared to everything else on the screen. This drawing is 1:1. The border is designed to print 1:1. If we look at it, it's 10.5 long by 8 tall. That'll print 1:1 on 8.5 by 11 paper. So that's your reference for this drawing. So the image itself is 1:1. This text though is too large. If I took a little line and just drew it straight up, it's not perfect what I drew, but if I tried to dimension this line, you're going to see that it's much larger than 0.125. It looks like it's 0.18 or something like that. So how do we control dimension styles in AutoCAD so we can follow the standards set by ANSI, drafting standards that everybody expects when they look at a drawing? The tab that you want to go to is Annotate. Within that tab, I'm going to open this up. We have many different options. These are the toolboxes I've talked about before. Home, that's the Draw toolbox, Modify toolbox, Annotate toolbox. Under Annotate is everything. In this case, we're going to the toolbox called Dimensions. To the right, there's a little arrow going at an angle. When you click on it, it goes into your Dimension Style Manager. Dimension Style Manager. When we go in here, we're going to create a new dimension style, and we're going to call it Triton, for our school name, Triton College. Triton, and we'll just say inches. The reason we're calling it Triton inches is when you're going to have a metric drawing, guess what you're going to have to do? Create a metric version. Okay? You literally have to have both sets of dimension styles. You will not be able to get away with one dimension style and just use it on both types of drawings. Because remember, when we're doing AutoCAD inch drawings, they're in inches. When we're doing metric drawings, they're following the ISO standards. It will be first angle projection with everything in metric, with a comma instead of a period, all the rules that we follow on the rest of this planet. Okay? Those standards are going to be utilized. So we have to have two different sets. You don't make them in the same file because this is an inch template, not a metric template. I have to split my screen, so I'm going to have to hit OK here so I can close out of this, so I can split this screen. That's the limitations of the software. I am going to open up that handout on dimension standards. I'm going to have to snip this to mark it up. So I could use the marker feature. There we go. Okay. So as I look at this handout, and then I go over here and I go into my dimension style settings. How do I know what partners with what? That's the question of the moment. When I'm in here, in this dialog box, the first tab is about the lines. The color of the lines, we leave that alone. We leave it always by block. We don't care. Line type, we leave alone. Line weight, we leave alone. Extension beyond ticks. The reason they use the word ticks is because Autodesk was started with architecture, and in architectural drawings they use ticks. They don't use arrows. Just if you're wondering why on earth do they call them ticks? It's not bug related. It's a symbol relationship from the history of where AutoCAD came from. Baseline spacing. Baseline spacing is where is the first dimension going to be from the object and from each other. See how it says 0.38? See here? Remember how I said 0.375? What did I say though? The first dimension is going to be ½ an inch away from the object, right? But it's ½ an inch away from the object because of what? You have a gap. See that gap? That 1/8 inch gap? Because you never put your extension line right on the object. Never. You never want your dimension lines touching the object. So this baseline spacing, when you see the word baseline spacing over here, baseline spacing, I can't draw an arrow across these two softwares. Sorry. If I was using my tablet, I could do it, but I can't do it on the computer I'm on right now. So I can't show this. But if you look you see how I can't do it? All the way over here. Baseline spacing, this is that 0.375 number. That refers to this and this. Okay? Next, suppressing. That means don't show me the line. There's dim line 1 and dim line 2. Dim line 1 is the first side you select. Doesn't mean it's the left side or the right side. It's just whichever you clicked on first. So don't use these unless you know exactly what you're doing. Because when you say suppress, that means don't show me that line. It is a useful tool, but you really have to know where did I click first. Most people don't, so you can't automate it. Anything you do in here is going to affect all your dimensions, not just the one you want to mess with. So be mindful of that. The next section, extension lines. Extension lines are these things. I'm going to change my color of my pen. This is an extension line. This is an extension line. Okay? I'm writing with my mouse, so it's a little slow. That's an extension line. Okay? This thing's the extension line. It's the line that extends from the dimension line to the object. That's the formal name for it. It's called an extension line. We're not changing anything about it. Oh, the dim line, by the way, is this guy. I did miss telling you that. Dim line. This is dim line. Let me try to tag these as I'm saying them. Sorry about that. Extension beyond dimension line. Extension beyond dimension line is this. The 0.0625. That's extension beyond dimension line. 0.0625, so you change that number. Offset from origin, that's this. This is important. Okay, that's your offset from origin. That's the language that AutoCAD uses. Offset from origin. Okay? That's what this is. Offset from origin. That is how far away is my dimension going to be from my object. You have to have a gap. Otherwise, the customer won't be able to tell the difference. Where does the dimension start? Where does the object end? And vice versa, where does the object begin and a dimension end? Or however way you want to phrase it, doesn't matter. So you don't want a tiny number there. You want that 1/8 of an inch. Fixed length extension lines? No, leave that alone. You don't want to mess with that one. And here too, extension line 1, extension line 2. These actually are married together. So your dim line 1, your extension line 1, they're based on where did I click first? Where did I click first? That's a tough one to remember, so I usually tell people you don't use that. Next tab. Symbols and arrows. Again, in the first tab, the only thing you made sure was baseline spacing is 0.375. Extension beyond dim line is 0.0625. Offset from origin is 0.125. Symbols and arrows. Arrows. Because I'm cheap and lazy, and yes, it is recorded for life on YouTube, as in most of my videos, I usually recommend pick open 30 for your arrows, because that uses less toner. There's no filled in arrows. Okay? The architectural tick, there you go. That's what architects use. That also uses very little toner, a little slash. Okay? In our case, we're going to use open 30 arrows. Open 30 arrows. Arrow size, our arrow size, if I scooch over on this side, arrow size is going to be 0.125. We won't have complete control of the height. In other software, for example, you see how this has the width information on here? This is in here. AutoCAD doesn't give us that level of control. Other software products do. So that's why that's in there. But in here in AutoCAD, you don't have that control. So you just identify which arrow style you're going to use, and that's it. End of story. Open 30. Center marks. I usually recommend none. The center marks, if you look at the little thumbnail preview over here, when you click on none, you see the little star disappears, or the cross, depending on how you look at it, little plus symbol. Okay? And then if you put on line, it actually draws like a center line. It's nice until you have a bunch of holes you want to dimension. Then you're going to want to never use this function again. My general rule of thumb is for now, just have it off. None. Make yourself put the center lines in by yourself. Okay? It's okay. But if you really, really must, line is the better choice. Okay? The gap, this little 0.09 reference, is how much of a little gap there is. 0.09 is really tiny, but it is bigger than a 1/16 of an inch. Smaller than an 1/8 of an inch, so it's about halfway there. So leave it at 0.09. It doesn't matter. Dimension break, we're not going to break any right now. An 1/8 of an inch is fine. Arc length symbols, this is not used that often, at least for the kind of drawings, most drawings. Arc length is the shape of the arc. When we get to a dimension like that, I'll show you the differences, but for now you just leave it where it is. It's okay. Radius jog dimension, jog angle 45, which is what we have referenced here, is fine. Don't worry about it. Jog height factor 1.5, you're fine. Don't worry about it. Text. So the only thing we changed in this tab, symbols and arrows, is the arrow size. We're using open 30, and we're making sure the arrows are 1/8 of an inch. Okay? That's it. Text. This one's important. Under text, text height. Remember, it was too big? Change it to 0.125. Text height is 1/8 of an inch. Text height is 1/8 of an inch. Text height is 1/8 of an inch. Text placement. Because we're following ANSI standards, centered is fine, left to right. That's fine. No problem. Text alignment is horizontal. That is an ANSI standard. You see down here how they have the ISO standard? When we deal with the metric drawings, that's the ISO standard, which is aligned, and in this case, it should be aligned with dimension, not with dimension. Let's see. I'd have to change two things, because your dimension has to be above the object. See that? If we were going to use ISO standards. But in our case, we're doing ANSI standards. So it's horizontal, centered, centered, left to right. Got it? So there's nothing we're changing in here. Horizontal is fine. The only subcategory we're affecting here is under text. The text height is what again? 0.125. The next tab, fit. Fit options. Either text or arrows is best, meaning that it'll kick out the arrows if it needs to. How many of you, when hand drawings, you realize your arrows won't fit inside with your dimensions, so you put your arrows outside? That's all this does. It affects which way it's going to present it. Let it do its job. It's okay. When text is not in the default position, put it next to the dimension line. That's fine. This is going to be your friend right here. Scale for dimension features. This is a one-to-one drawing, so there's nothing you're going to do with this particular drawing when it comes to this little spot right here. But the next drawing you're going to do will need to be scaled. How many of you want to have to change every single tab and adjust the size of everything here? None of us. Absolutely zero. None of us. I'm going to repeat this when we get to the next drawing, which will require probably quarter scale drawing, so it'll be smaller. The inverse of your scale of your drawing is the number you put in this box that I just highlighted on the screen. The inverse of the scale of the drawing. So if the drawing is quarter scale, in here you put 4. If your drawing is 3/4 scale, in here you put 4/3. If your drawing is 10 32nd scale, it's 32nd over 10. Get it? The inverse of the scale of the drawing is the number you put in here. And that is the only box you ever change in the future. The last thing is fine-tuning right here. Place text manually. Turn it on. You want to have total control of where your dimensions go. So you want that box on. The default is off. You want it on. Primary units. This is where we talk about decimal places. Remember, the number of decimal places, you may as well put little dollar signs for every decimal place, because that's how much more expensive it's going to take to build. What's it going to take to build something to 4 decimal place tolerance versus 2? Get it? Little dollar signs is what you're adding. So our drawing, this particular drawing, is set to how many decimal places? 2. See that? So we want our dimensions to be to 2 decimal places. We want our precision, therefore, to be at 2. That doesn't mean we're drawing to 2 decimal places. We're still drawing lines 0.125 long, 0.0625. Get it? That's not changing. 0.03125. How we draw doesn't change. It's how the dimension is displayed. We want it to display to 2 decimal places, because if we throw that dimension on the drawing to 4 decimal places, that means we're implying that's the tolerance for that drawing. Tolerance, we can't do that with that. Round off. Round off to 4 decimal places is fine. If you show a drawing to 2 decimal places, basically what you're saying is 0.125, I'm going to round it off. It's going to see it as 0.1250 and just round it off based on that information. But the precision, meaning how am I displaying it on the screen, that's what the precision is. So please remember that. The rest we don't touch. By the way, here's the most dangerous box on the planet, right here. Scale factor. Never use it. That's the answer I'm going to give you. Scale factor literally changes the number you see. So if you say that your object is 1 1/4 and the scale of your drawing is 2, and for some reason you think it's a good idea to put 2 in here, guess what 1 1/4 will turn into? 1.25 times 2. Instead of displaying 1.25, it's going to display 2.5. Very dangerous. So For the sake of simplicity, I'm going to tell you never use scale factor. Never use scale factor. By the way, never use scale factor. Cool. Suppressing zeros, I usually don't. I leave them to 2 decimal places. What's the point of having precision if that's all you're going to do is suppress them? So I leave that alone. Alternate units. Let's say you are going to give this drawing to a European customer. So you want to show the metric dimensions. That's what this multiplier is right there, 25.4. Okay? Because remember I told you that's the magic number to convert between inches and millimeters, 25.4. That's it. To convert back and forth. Take inches, multiply by 25.4. Take millimeters, divide by 25.4. That way you can go back and forth. In our case, we're not going to do dual dimensioning, so we don't worry about it. Tolerances. This one's fun. I tend to do tolerance at the dimension level. But if all the dimensions need to show plus or minus something, you can actually put it in here. But generally speaking, that's not how we detail drawings. The tolerances are usually found in the title block. They're not found with every single dimension. So quick review of this video. Lines. When we go to the snippet right here, what are these? 0.375. This is baseline spacing. Let me change the color of the pen. This is called baseline spacing. Baseline spacing. Baseline spacing. Baseline spacing is the spacing between your dimensions. That 0.375 business. Okay? When you set this dimension style, it is set only for this drawing. So what I recommend you do is that inch border that you guys made at the beginning of the semester, set the dimension styles that we just went over into that, and then every time you import that border into a drawing, the dimension style goes with it. Because right now what we did is only resident on this drawing. It's not really part of a template. If you wanted to always, the baggage, as I like to say, good baggage, come with the border, this is the kind of stuff you want to do to that drawing. And then every time you import that drawing into your other files, it will come out correctly. You'll have everything in there, all your line weights, everything. Which takes me to the next step. Now we went ahead and fixed it, but did this dimension change? Because now we have inches, right? But when did we drop this dimension? This dimension was dropped before we did that. So this dimension is based on standard. See that? Now, I'm going to leave that dimension there so you can see the difference. Over here, I'm going to go to dimension. I'm going to go from endpoint to endpoint. And that's the new one. See the difference? Original and crispy. No, just joking. There's your original, which is based on standard, and there's what it really needs to look like. Now, what it doesn't do is space it correctly. It will not space it correctly. Notice I can still take my dimension and move it wherever I want. So going back to the old days, back to hand drawings back in the day, all you used in hand drawings was like your ruler, right? And you just spaced that out 1/2 inch. This drawing is to what scale? 1:1. Okay, so I can use literally the same numbers. So I can go ahead and offset. Remember offset, one of the first commands I taught you. Type in 0.5. I can offset my lines out the 1/2 inch. Notice how I did that? I can offset my object line out. I can offset my object line out. That's where my first dimension goes. Then I go back to offset for my next dimension, which is the 3/8. So I can offset this dimension out here. If I have another dimension out there, I don't know. I'm just throwing them out there. Got it? Those lines that I threw out there will become, when I go to dimension and I go from endpoint to endpoint, I can drop my dimension exactly where that line is. And it drops exactly where it's supposed to. Rinse and repeat for the next dimension. Here, to here so I could drop this one in. And then that'll be in the correct position. You will have to go back and delete those little references you threw in there because you can't leave them on the drawing. But notice what happens. Where are the grips of my dimensions? They're inside the object, so I had to pull it out. So be mindful of that when you drop dimensions. This is going to take practice, so I'm going to undo again. Hold on. I see the look on your face. Okay, I'm going to go back. Yeah, you YouTube person watching this video, I see the look on your face. So I'm going to go from endpoint to endpoint. See how the dimension is there? You see how it wants to lock in and stuff? You see how it's moving around? I'm going to move it up to this top position. Why? Because I know that's going to be the furthest out dimension. Notice how it popped to the one corner? See how the dimension lines popped out? Because I had it close to the edge. Now if I move a little further in, you see how they pop in? See that? If I pop this completely out, see how that stays in? That's the automation we built in. Those features I was just talking about. When I told you under modify, and I went in here and we talked about fit, and I said either text or arrows beside dimension line. And then I told you to place text manually so you have total control of where the text goes. That's what you get by doing that. This little tab, this fit tab, when you do this beside dimension line is default anyways. But turning this one little checkbox right there gives you complete control of where to drop that number. And you want that kind of control because this is a straightforward drawing, but you could be dealing with something a lot more complex. And you want to be able to manipulate your dimensions and quickly and efficiently because that's what your company is paying you for. They want you to get it done faster, not God knows when. Make sense? So that's why I gave you that suggestion of how to do that. This feature right here, I'm using dimension with a little sunburst, is good and it's bad. It has two sides to it. When I look at the dimension dialog box, there's a couple of different ways to dimension in here. Linear is literally linear, 90 degrees only. I kind of like that. That's great for horizontal and vertical. What that allows me to do, if I want to use this, I can go from endpoint to, let's say, here, and it will 100% always be linear. It's not going to give me an aligned dimension. An aligned dimension would be like the hypotenuse. Let me show you what that is. Meaning, if I pick a line, and I pick that endpoint, and I pick this endpoint, boom, goes off at an angle. I don't want this. See that? If this happens to you, use linear. Don't use aligned. Aligned is this dimension, which is from that first point I picked to this point out here. Well, that's not what I'm really trying to dimension. I'm just trying to dimension the vertical height. When you use the sunburst dimension style, it's kind of a smart dimension tool. It's probably the way to phrase it. And I pick this endpoint and I pick this endpoint. See that? See how it wants to do that? But if I move my mouse down, it goes to vertical. See that? And if I move my mouse off up here, it goes to horizontal. The sunburst one is the one that some students have used the language with me that it hops. Yeah, it hops to different spots. If you find this annoying, some students, they find it annoying, don't use it. Pull right off the list. I don't want aligned, I want linear. Just select it. Select only linear. Make sense? Select only this, select only that. If you find the sunburst annoying. You'll only know this when you start using it. So I'm prepping the conversation when I'm doing this lecture for you, because you haven't really dimensioned anything yet. So you're going to start experiencing this, and then you'll go back to this video and be like, oh yeah, I remember that. It'll make more sense later than it does right this minute. Okay? So the next dimension, I'm going to drop in as a linear dimension. I want a dimension here and position it right there. Again, delete those little reference lines that are in there. And this up, am I missing a dimension? Looks like it. The best thing to do when you are doing dimensioning and you actually have a drawing to use that has dimensions on it as a reference is as you drop every dimension, check mark it off on your drawing. Just knock it off. Okay? I can't do it on the board. I have to snip this. But if I snip that, then I have to delete this. So I can't use the snip tool right now. So I can't show you on the board. Like I'm marking this thing up. I can't mark up the other drawing at the same time. Because the snip tool only works one object at a time. So I won't be able to do it. But all you got to do is X everything off. That way you know you're not going to miss anything. So here's the 1 inch dimension. There's the 1 inch. There's the 1 inch. If you watch where my mouse is going. Here's the 1/4 inch. Here's the 1/4 inch. Is it okay that the zero's in front? Yes, that's fine. It says 0.25 instead of 0.25. That's okay. Now if it said 0.3, that's not fine. That's a problem. That would be 2 decimal places. So if I zoom up here, I've got the 1 1/4 up here, but I need to put in which one? I have to put in the other one, the 1/4 inch. So from here to here, remember it'll pop all over the place, so you have to control where it goes. See how it's scrunched in there? Is that good? Is that acceptable? You all know that's not. I see that shaking head. No way. That you pop that out. Now I've had students say, well, hold on a second. When I pop that out, it looks pretty close to this one. Can I delete one of these? Like only show the 0.25 once? You can, but then you want to suppress the dimension inside of it. I'm not going to talk about that today, but we'll talk about it on a different day. For today, I'm going to say leave everything the way you see it. Because I can control every single dimension individually if I want to. It's just not a good habit to have. You want to leave those dimensions in there. So that side's dimension. Are we done with that side? Everything in there we could possibly detail? I'm missing something, right? The radiuses, the corner radii. So let's go ahead and throw that in. Okay, there's the radius. See? And I could rotate it anywhere. See how it does that? Do I ever want a dimension inside my part? Nope. Always avoid that. Go outside of the part. Okay? Now the other object that needs to be dimensioned is this. See this diameter 0.13? This one's going to be interesting because if I pick this, it wants to not give me the content. You notice that? All it does is give me the diameter of 0.25. This is an example where I'm going to edit the dimension. I click once on this item, right mouse button. If I go to Properties, there we go. You'll notice in this Properties box all the information about that dimension. Fill color, text, left to right, text override. See this box right here? Measurement 0.25. Text override. I'm going to type in something funny just so you can see what it's gonna do. I put in Daffy Duck just so you could see the obvious change. You see that? So text override is right here. So what you would do, you cannot use the symbols easily. That's project. But you can %% for diameter, literally type in everything else. 0.13 through. Make sure you spell through correctly instead of through. Put that R in there. It's a common one missed. I don't know why. Instead of being able to put in the symbol, because this is more like a 3D CAD product thing, you're going to put in C-bore, and that's a counter bore. That was the other name for a counter bore. Also %D for diameter. Did I lose it? There it goes. D. What was the number? 0.25. And then it is 0.13, and then you're going to have to spell out the word D. It's scrunched over. Sorry about that. Here, let me extend that out a little bit. See that? But it looks like instead of % D, it gave me, is it % C? Let's find out. Because I could have used it wrong. You see how it shows, there we go. It's % C, not D. I think D for diameter, but % C is the code. % C. So that you could get the little diameter symbol. Okay? And when you're done, you X out of this, and voila, there it is. It is literally spelled out. Now look how long it is. Okay? If you double click on it, you actually can literally text edit it on the screen. Once you have it typed up. Up above, let me maximize. I can't do it while it's, I gotta open this up, sorry. Double click on it. While it's in this mode, you can also justify left, justify right. So you want to do justify middle left. See that? So it comes out a little neater. And yes, you can shorten this up. Once you've got it in there, you can move it over a little bit. But it does take up quite a bit of space. That note. And because it takes up so much space, you might want to move your views over a little bit. See that? We talked about the move command in a different time a couple of weeks ago. One of the other commands you learned. But that's how you would do that. If you chose to double click on this thing before editing it, you see this number right there? You can do that. If I manipulate the actual number you see there, it wipes out that dimension. What's in that blue field when I click away is the actual number. So here, yeah, and it says, do you want to save the text? No, I don't. So in here, when I double click on this, you see how there's no blue field? Because we completely did an override. We did an override of all the text that was in there. And the way we did that, we clicked on it, right mouse button, and went to the properties. And the override option is right there, text override. Okay, this is in the video, so it's being recorded, so you'll have it. And this view, if I want to check the radius, under annotate dimension, again dimension, now I want to pick this line and this line so I can get this angle. See that? Done. If you don't like doing it that way, using the star, I call it the sunburst icon, just go down here under your set of options and pick angular. Remember that, okay? Putting in the next dimension, I want a dimension from here to here. And this one actually will drop right there. I don't need another dimension there. There we go. There's that one. I don't need the outer position for there. I can just go ahead and put another annotation for a dimension from here. Now this one, this line goes so far out. See that? So before I do anything, I would pull this in to be a little further in, not have it so far out. Pull that center line in a lot closer. Doesn't want to move very well. Because this one, this line extends too far out. Now I would go ahead and put in a dimension from here to here and align it. See how it doesn't want to align neatly? See what it's doing? This is an example where you can't use the starburst. You actually have to pick a line, and of all things, you got to pick endpoint, the same 2 spots to get the right number. That's why I have to pull this guy in, because otherwise it was going to be too far out, because I need that gap. You always want that gap in your dimension, because you never want your dimension somehow merging with the object. Never want that. And then you throw in the radius and diameter. So this is the radius of this thing, 0.06. Now, you see that? Remember I told you about that center line business? Here's an example where you don't want it. See? See how I threw that big center mark? And you're like, wait a minute. I don't like that. Why just go to your dim style? If you type it in, remember how I showed you guys? Type the stuff in, start with dim, and it'll find style. Modify it to not include. See how I left lines on? Here's an example where you want none. Now, when I close it, boom, it's back to beautiful. Cool? So those center lines are nice, except when I'm dealing with anything other than horizontal and vertical positions. So that's why I usually have that off. So then the next thing is this. Do I want the radius of this, or do I want the diameter of that circle? Which do I want? Diameter. So I have to pick diameter. I have to pick diameter, because when I pick the not starburst, the sunburst one, and I pick this object, it actually, oh, there it goes. Now it picked diameter. Earlier it picked radius. Why? Because of the other dimension I selected before it was a radius. It's the only thing I could guess. So there's this. Now you see how it says diameter 0.50, but it doesn't say through? And let's say I want to add the word through to it. The same way I did the override up here. See how I did that? I could do it that way. Or, remember how I double clicked on this one? Because I don't want to change everything about it, instead of picking the properties version, I'm just going to double click on it. Make sure I do not touch the 0.5 part of it, but right after I type in through, and boom, it adds it to it. Cool? I made sure I arrowed over with my keyboard though, to make sure I don't accidentally delete the 0.50 reference on there. Now this drawing is done, except for the fact that the line weights are not correct. The object lines are the same line weight as everything else on the drawing. And we know that's not how we turn in a drawing. So the last thing we want to do is make sure we get our line weights set. There's a couple of ways to do that. The simplest method is you identify what you're going to use as your line weights. So right now for line weights, the default is 0.25 millimeters. So for object lines, we want to be thicker than 0.25. So let's pick 0.40. Why? Because I just did. Yes, it is that random for now. At a company, they'll have a standard. They've set that standard God knows when, and it could have been just as random as what I just did. All right? But 0.4 is a good line weight thickness when you consider the fact that 0.25 is default. 0.4 is almost twice as thick, right? Almost. 0.25 millimeters versus 0.4 millimeters. So visually, they'll be distinctly unique from each other. The true test will be when you print. Because if your printer is incapable of identifying line weights to that level, then you will have to be more drastic in your line weight choices. You'll have to pick numbers that are further away from each other so that your printer can actually recognize them. Now, modern day printers, usually that's not a problem. But if you have a printer in your office that the company refuses to get rid of, and it might be 10 years old or 20 years old or God knows what, but it works great, so they're not getting rid of it anytime soon, well, you might have to do some adjustments. This printer in here is a good 10 years old at least. I'm not getting rid of it. If they still sell the toner for it, you bet I'm not. They're too expensive. to just replace printers, especially the large laser ones. So if they still sell toner for it, like HP, I'm not getting rid of it. So the toner is expensive. It's usually at 150 or so a pop for laser printers. So keep that in mind for those of you who just shot your eyebrows up. Yeah, they're expensive. So yeah, the printers are physically expensive as well. So you might have to make adjustments. We won't know until you print. Once you identify what line weight you want, you pick one of the objects and make sure that that's the line weight you set it to. That's the way I do it. Okay? And then you literally can match properties for everything else. Now this is one method. This method is a little time consuming, and my lazy bone says don't do it because there's a faster method, and that is using your layer manager properties. But that method I'm not going to show you yet in this video. That I'm going to save for another day. First, I'm trying to piecemeal everything that you're learning. I want you to learn some things, and then we'll keep adding to what you're learning. Otherwise, it's information overload, and you'll get nothing done. So if you can at least do this, see how your object now pops? See how it pops up from the screen compared to everything else? Everything that's an object needs to pop. Everything else should not be popping off the screen. Do you see that on the screen, how it pops? Solid lines need to be very bold. Everything else subdued. When you do a print preview of something that looks like this, we'll pick our printer here. It's going to be regular letter paper. You're going to print to window. This you've done before, so you know how to do this already. Center the plot. The fit's going to be 1:1 because it's a 1:1 job. Plot style table, for now we'll just leave it monochrome like we have in the past. We're not going to do anything fancy yet. And we do a preview. It looks like the top and bottom edges got chopped off, so that might be an issue with the printer parameters. We might have to check the border. So you did it based on printing to PDF, not printing to a specific printer, correct?
Yeah, PDF.
Yep, and that's what you're going to find out. Anytime you print to a different printer, you'll have different print settings. So print to PDF, I imagine your border did not disappear because you did the Word, Microsoft, print to print PDF. Yeah, and then if I preview for that one, it's perfect. See that? Top and bottom's not chopped off. So every printer has its parameters set. So if for some reason it's not working, don't presume that you're doing something wrong. You have to appreciate the fact that the different printer you're using requires different settings. So this is what it looks like to print to PDF. If I zoom in, didn't seem to show too much of a distinction on line weight, or did it? What do you think, guys? Kind of looks a little different, but not by much, does it? Okay. So maybe we make the default thinner. See what I'm talking about? This is where the finesse comes in, because this isn't a lockdown, has to always be these millimeter differences. Depends on perspective. How it looks on the screen and how it looks printed might not look the same as it does on the screen. Get it? So you have to figure that out. So for now, without any deep thinking on the subject, if I just print this to PDF, I'll call it thing. We'll have a PDF print, which will be a little different. Let's find thing. There it is. That's what it looks like printed through the PDF function. Does it look that different, line weights, guys? You're sitting there. I don't see too much of a difference. I don't know about anybody else. I don't see much of a difference. If I zoom in, maybe. Is that close enough? it's kind of close. Not enough of a difference to make me say, aha. So now this is where I start saying I need to make the other lines thinner. The finesse starts coming in. So if I go back, if I go to my line weight settings, right now the default is 0.25. So let me make 0.25 something really thin, 0.09. Just for fun. Now if I go print, previous plot, preview this, it is distinctly different. See that? That is different. Now you see it. Let me pull back. Let me go to print. Thing 2. Here's thing. And thing 2. Okay. So, okay, what am I doing wrong? Hold on. Up there it is. There you go. There's the difference. Thing 2 is on the left. Thing is on the right. Object pops a little better on thing 2. Again, it's finesse. It's up to you. Cool? And your company really tells you what it is. They have a standard, you follow their standard, and that's it. But for us, it looks like 0.09 is going to be the default line weight thickness, and we'll want the object lines to be 0.40, at least for our purposes, for this class. Whatever you do at home, whoever's watching this video, it's up to you. But you do want contrast. Contrast is important. It helps the customer see the object, see the dimensions, see the drawing clearly. And that'll end this lecture.